Officer David Thompson had been serving the community for 15 years. He was known as a fair and honest policeman who always tried to do the right thing. But on this cold Tuesday morning, everything changed. A terrible accident had happened. On Maple Street, an elderly man named Mr. Williams had been hit by a car while crossing the road. The driver had fled the scene, leaving the poor man injured and alone. David arrived at the scene quickly. He saw the broken glass, the damaged streetlight, and Mr. Williams being taken to the hospital. The pressure was enormous. His captain wanted answers first. The media was asking questions. The whole town was watching. David looked round the accident, seen with worried eyes. He had been a police officer for so many years, but he had never felt this much pressure before. His captain, Captain Johnson, kept calling him on the radio every few minutes. "Thompson, what do you have for me? The reporters are already here. We need to show the public that we are doing something," Captain Johnson said through the radio. David wiped the sweat from his forehead despite the cold morning air. He knew that if he didn't solve this case quickly, it would look bad for the entire police department. The town trusted him, and he didn't want to let them down. He began questioning the few witnesses who had gathered round the scene. Mrs. Peterson, who owned the flower shop nearby, said she heard a loud crash but didn't see what happened. Mr. Garcia, who was walking his dog, said he saw a car speeding away, but he couldn't remember what color it was. David felt frustrated. The evidence was not clear, and the witnesses couldn't give him much help. He walked round the scene again, looking for any clues that might help him solve the case. Just then, he noticed a young man walking on the sidewalk about 50 meters away. The young man was carrying books and looked like he was heading to school. David noticed that the young man kept looking in their direction and seemed nervous. In his rush to solve the case, David made a terrible mistake. He arrested 20-year-old Tom Baker, a college student who had simply been walking nearby. Tom was carrying his books, heading to his morning classes, when David approached him. "Sir, I need you to come with me," David said, his voice heavy with authority. "But I didn't do anything wrong," Tom protested, his eyes wide with fear and confusion. David's mind was clouded by pressure and stress. He convinced himself that Tom was the one. The young man's nervous behavior seemed suspicious to him, though. Tom was simply scared of being falsely accused. Tom tried to explain that he was just a student going to his morning classes at the community college. He showed David his student ID card and his class schedule, but David was so focused on solving the case quickly that he didn't listen carefully to what Tom was saying. "Why do you keep looking this way? Why do you seem so nervous?" David asked Tom. "Because there are police cars and ambulances everywhere. Of course I'm curious about what happened. And I'm nervous because you're questioning me like I did something wrong," Tom replied honestly. But David had already made up his mind. He put handcuffs on Tom and led him to the police car. Tom couldn't believe what was happening to him. Just minutes ago, he was thinking about his history test, and now he was being arrested for a crime he didn't commit. The news of Tom's arrest spread quickly through the small town. By evening, everyone was talking about it. Some people were relieved that the police had caught the person responsible so quickly. Others wondered if they had arrested the right person. Tom's family was devastated. His mother, Mary Baker, cried for hours. She kept asking herself how this could happen to her son. She knew Tom was a good boy who had never been in trouble before. His father, Robert, couldn't understand how their honest, hard-working son could be accused of such a terrible crime. Robert worked at the local factory and had always taught his children to respect the law and help others, but the person who suffered most was Tom's younger sister, Emma. At just 26 years old, Emma had worked incredibly hard to become a judge. She had studied day and night, overcome countless obstacles, and finally achieved her dream of serving justice. Emma had always been proud of her family. She had worked her way through law school by working part-time jobs and studying late into the night. She had always believed that the justice system was fair and that truth would always win in the end. Now she watched helplessly as her beloved brother faced serious charges for something he didn't do. Emma knew Tom's character better than anyone. She knew he would never hurt another person. But as a judge, she had to stay professional and couldn't interfere in the case. Emma sat in her small apartment that night, holding a picture of her aunt, Tom, from their childhood. She wanted to help him so badly. But she knew that using her position as a judge would be wrong. She had to trust that the truth would come out in court. David went home that night feeling uneasy. Something didn't feel right in his heart, but he pushed those feelings away. He told his wife Helen that he had solved the hit-and-run case, but he didn't feel the satisfaction he usually felt when he solved a case. Helen noticed that David seemed troubled. "You should be happy that you solved the case so quickly," she said. "Yes, I should be," David replied, but his voice sounded uncertain. He didn't know that his decision would soon come back to change his life forever. As days passed, David began to feel a growing weight in his chest. He couldn't sleep well at night. His wife, Helen, noticed his restlessness. "What's bothering you, David?" she asked gently one evening as they sat at their kitchen table. "It's this case," he replied, staring out the window. "Something doesn't feel right about it." Helen had been married to David for 12 years. She knew him well enough to see when something was troubling him deeply. She watched as he pushed his dinner around his plate without eating much. "You always get like this when you're working on difficult cases," Helen said softly. "But this time seems different." David nodded slowly. "I keep thinking about that young man, Tom Baker. When I arrested him, he seemed so scared and confused. Not like someone who was trying to hide something, but like someone who genuinely didn't understand what was happening." Meanwhile, Tom sat in his small cell at the county jail. The cell was cold and grey, with just a narrow bed, a small sink, and a toilet. Tom tried to keep himself busy by reading books that his family brought him and writing letters to his parents and sister. In his letters, Tom never complained about his situation. Instead, he wrote about how much he missed his family and how he hoped they weren't worrying too much about him. He wrote about the books he was reading and how he was using this time to think about his future. "Dear Mom and Dad," Tom wrote in one letter, "I know this is hard for all of us, but I want you to know that I'm staying strong. I believe that the truth will come out eventually. Please don't work too hard to pay for the lawyer. I know you're doing your best." Tom's friends from college started a small campaign to support him. They believed in his character completely. Sarah, his study partner, organized a group of students to collect signatures on a petition. They also raised money to help his family with the legal costs. "We all know Tom," Sarah told the local newspaper. "He's the kind of person who helps other students with their homework. He volunteers at the animal shelter on weekends. There's no way he would hurt anyone and then run away." Mary and Robert Baker worked extra hours to pay for their son's legal fees. The lawyer they hired cost $300 per hour, and they knew the case might take months to resolve. Mary cleaned offices at night after finishing her day job at the grocery store. She would come home at midnight, exhausted and worried, but she never complained. Robert took on weekend shifts at the factory. Working 7 days a week, they were tired and worried. But their love for Tom kept them going. Every evening, They would sit together at their kitchen table, counting the money they had earned and figuring out how to pay for the next week of legal fees. "We'll get through this," Robert would tell Mary when she started to cry. "Our boy is innocent, and everyone will see that eventually." Emma watched from afar, her heart breaking every day. She saw her parents aging rapidly from stress and worry. Her father's hair seemed to turn grey each week, and her mother had lost weight from not eating properly. She saw her brother growing thinner and sadder during her brief visits to the jail. Tom tried to smile and act strong when she visited, but Emma could see the pain in his eyes. But she held on to her principles and didn't abuse her position as a judge. Emma knew that if she tried to help Tom using her influence as a judge, it would be wrong and could make things worse for him in the long run. At the police station, David's partner, Officer James Mitchell, began asking difficult questions. James had been David's partner for 3 years, and they had always worked well together. "David, are you sure we got the right person?" James asked during their patrol one afternoon. "The evidence points to him," David replied, but his voice lacked conviction. "What evidence?" "A young man walking to school." James pressed gently. "I've been thinking about this case, and I can't find any real evidence that connects Tom Baker to the accident." David felt defensive, but deep down, he knew James was right. The so-called evidence was weak at best. Tom had been in the area, and he had seemed nervous when questioned. But that wasn't really evidence of guilt. Meanwhile, the real perpetrator, a wealthy businessman named Charles Harrison, continued his normal life. Charles owned several businesses in town and lived in a large house on the hill. He went to work every day, attended business meetings, and had dinner with his family every night. Charles had been drinking at a business breakfast on the morning of the accident. He had hit Mr. Williams while driving too fast and had panicked. Instead of stopping to help, he had driven home and parked his damaged car in his garage. He felt guilty about what he had done, but he was too scared to come forward. He told himself that the old man would be fine and that someone else would take care of everything. The community was divided. Some people supported David and the police, trusting their judgment. They believed that the police must have good reasons for arresting Tom, even if those reasons weren't made public yet. Others believed in Tom's innocence and organized peaceful gatherings to show their support. They held signs that said, "Free Tom Baker and justice for the innocent." Every night, David would sit in his study, reading over the case files again and again. His conscience was eating away at him, but his pride and fear of admitting his mistake kept him silent. Emma, meanwhile, threw herself into her work, handling other cases with even more care and attention. She promised herself that she would never let emotion cloud her judgment, even though her heart was breaking for her family. The truth was there, waiting to be discovered, but sometimes the truth needs courage to bring it to light. 3 months later, fate brought David and Emma together in the most unexpected way. Tom's case was assigned to Judge Emma Baker's courtroom. Neither David nor Emma initially knew about their connection through Tom. The morning of the trial, Emma arrived at the courthouse early, as she always did. She liked to review her cases in the quiet hours before the courtroom filled with people. She poured herself a cup of coffee and opened the case file that would change everything. Emma sat behind her judge's bench, wearing her black robes with dignity. When she saw her brother's name on the case file, her heart stopped for a moment. She had to read it twice to make sure she wasn't mistaken. There it was in black ink: "The People versus Thomas Baker." For a moment, Emma felt dizzy. She had known that Tom's case would go to trial eventually, but she had never imagined it would be assigned to her courtroom. She took a deep breath and reminded herself of the oath she had taken when she became a judge. But she had sworn an oath to serve justice fairly, regardless of personal feelings. Emma knew that she could ask another judge to take the case, but she also knew that she was the most qualified person to handle it. She had studied the law for years and had always been fair in her decisions. David entered the courtroom in his crisp police uniform, ready to give his testimony. He had practiced his statement many times over the past 3 months. He had gone over every detail of that morning, trying to convince himself that he had done the right thing. He had practiced his statement many times, but seeing the young judge's serious and compassionate eyes made him feel nervous. There was something about Judge Baker that reminded him of his own daughter, who was studying to become a teacher. The courtroom was full of people. Tom's family sat in the front row, holding hands and trying to stay strong. Mary Baker wore her best dress, and Robert had borrowed a suit from his brother. Tom's college friends filled several rows behind them. On the other side of the courtroom sat Mr. Williams, the elderly man who had been hit by the car. He was using a walking stick now, but he looked much better than he had 3 months ago. He wanted to see justice done, but he also wanted to make sure the right person was punished. Officer Thompson, please tell the court what you observed on the morning of the incident, Emma said, her voice steady despite her inner turmoil. David began his testimony, describing the scene and his reasons for arresting Tom. He told the court about the pressure he had felt to solve the case quickly. He described how Tom had seemed nervous and had been in the area at the time of the accident. But as he spoke, Emma's careful and respectful questions began to reveal the weaknesses in his case. Emma asked her questions in a calm, professional voice, but inside her heart was racing. She was questioning the man who had arrested her brother, but she had to remain fair and impartial. Officer Thompson, you mentioned that the suspect appeared nervous. Can you think of any other reasons why an innocent person might appear nervous when approached by police? David paused. He had never considered this perspective before. The question made him think about his own children and how they would react if a police officer questioned them. Well, yes, Your Honor, I suppose anyone would be nervous in that situation. And the evidence linking Mr. Baker to the scene, can you describe it again? David's confidence began to crumble. He realized that when he said his evidence out loud in court, it sounded very weak. He was in the area, Your Honor. Was he the only person in the area that morning? No, Your Honor, there were several people. Emma continued to ask questions that showed how little real evidence there was against Tom. She asked about the investigation, about other potential suspects, and about the timeline of events. With each question, it became clearer that the case against Tom was built on assumptions rather than facts. Emma's heart ached as she professionally dismantled the case against her own brother. She wasn't trying to be cruel to David. She was simply seeking the truth. She could see that David was beginning to realize his mistake, and she felt sorry for him even though he had hurt her family. During a break, Emma's assistant brought her some new evidence that had been overlooked. A local shop owner had found security camera footage from his store and had brought it to the courthouse that morning. The footage showed the street where the accident had happened. Security camera footage from a nearby shop showed a black luxury car speeding away from the scene. The license plate was partially visible, and the car was clearly expensive and well-maintained. It was nothing like the old car that Tom drove to school. When the trial resumed, Emma presented this new evidence to the court. She played the video on a large screen so everyone could see it clearly. The footage showed the exact moment when the car hit Mr. Williams and then sped away without stopping. David's face went pale as he realized what this meant. He recognized the car immediately. It was a black Mercedes that belonged to Charles Harrison, the wealthy businessman who owned several stores in town. Charles had been at a business meeting in the area that morning. "Officer Thompson, in light of this new evidence, do you still believe Mr. Baker is the perpetrator?" David looked at Tom, then at Emma, then back at the evidence. His 15 years of service had taught him to recognize the truth when he saw it. He could see Tom's innocent face and his family's hopeful expressions. He knew he had made a terrible mistake. "No, Your Honor," he said quietly, "I don't believe he is." The courtroom was silent except for Mary Baker's quiet sobs of relief. Robert put his arm round his wife, and Emma had to fight back her own tears. Tom looked up at the ceiling and whispered a quiet thank you. After the court session, David couldn't go home. He sat in his patrol car outside the courthouse, his hands shaking as he held the steering wheel. The weight of what he had done, arresting an innocent young man, felt unbearable. David stared at the courthouse building through his windshield. People were walking out, talking quietly among themselves about what they had witnessed in the courtroom. He saw Tom's family walking together, finally able to smile for the first time in 3 months. He thought about Tom's 3 months in detention, about his family's suffering, about the money they had spent on legal fees. David realized that his mistake had nearly destroyed an entire family. He imagined how scared Tom must have been, sitting in that cold jail cell, knowing he was innocent but unable to prove it. David remembered his own children and how he would feel if someone falsely accused them of a crime. The thought made his stomach turn. He had always taught his kids to trust the police, to believe that officers would protect them and treat them fairly. Now, he realized that he had failed to live up to those standards. His radio crackled with routine calls from other officers, but David couldn't bring himself to respond. He felt like he didn't deserve to wear the uniform anymore. The badge on his chest felt heavy, and his hands continued to shake. Judge Emma was in her chambers, removing her robes with trembling hands. She had managed to maintain her professional composure during the trial, but now the emotions flooded through her. She had just helped prove her brother's innocence, but she couldn't celebrate. Not yet. Emma hung her black robes on the wooden hanger and sat down at her desk. She looked at the picture of her family that she kept on her desk, a photo from last Christmas when they were all happy and together. Tom was smiling in the picture, holding their family dog. She thought about how hard it had been to remain professional while watching her brother's case unfold. Every time she saw Tom sitting at the defendant's table, she wanted to jump down from her judge's bench and hug him. But she knew that staying impartial was the only way to truly help him. Emma knew that the hardest part was over, but there was still work to be done. The real perpetrator needed to be found and arrested. Her brother needed to be completely cleared of all charges, and somehow the family needed to heal from this terrible experience. There was a gentle knock on her door. David stood there, his police cap in his hands, looking defeated but determined. His uniform was wrinkled, and his eyes were red from holding back tears. "Your Honor, may I speak with you privately?" Emma nodded, not yet revealing that she was Tom's sister. She gestured for David to sit down in the chair across from her desk. She could see that he was struggling with something important. "I need to confess something," David said, his voice breaking. "I made a terrible mistake. I was under so much pressure to solve the case quickly that I convinced myself Tom was guilty when I had no ray. All evidence, I destroyed that young man's life because I was too proud to admit I was wrong." David's voice cracked as he continued. "I've been a police officer for 15 years. I've always tried to do the right thing. But this time, I let my pride and the pressure from my superiors cloud my judgment. I convinced myself that being nervous made Tom guilty, when really he was just scared. Emma watched this broken man before. Her aunt felt something she didn't expect: compassion. Here was someone who had hurt her family deeply, but who was now showing genuine remorse. She could see that he was truly sorry for what he had done. "What are you going to do about it?" she asked gently. "I'm going to find the real perpetrator. I'm going to make sure Tom is completely cleared. And I'm going to face whatever consequences come my way." David looked directly at Emma as he spoke. "I know I might lose my job. I know people will be angry with me. But I can't live with myself if I don't make this right. That young man and his family deserve justice." It was then that Emma made her own confession. "Officer Thompson, I need to tell you something. Tom Baker is my brother." David's eyes widened in shock and shame. He felt like the air had been knocked out of his lungs. The judge who had been so professional and fair during the trial was the sister of the man he had wrongly arrested. "Oh God, what have I done? I'm so sorry. I'm so very sorry." "I know you are," Emma said softly, "and I believe you want to make this right." Emma could see that David was genuinely remorseful. She had watched him during the trial and had seen how his confidence crumbled when he realized he had made a mistake. She knew that he was a good person who had made a terrible error in judgment. Together, they worked through the night. David used his police resources to track down Charles Harrison. They found witnesses who had seen the black luxury car speeding away. They gathered evidence that had been overlooked in the rush to close the case. David called his partner James, who had been questioning the case from the beginning. James was eager to help find the real truth. They interviewed the shop owner who had provided the security camera footage. They tracked down other people who had been in the area that morning. When Charles Harrison was arrested the next morning, he broke down and confessed. He had been drinking at his business meeting and had panicked after hitting Mr. Williams. Charles had been living with guilt for 3 months, and he was almost relieved when the police finally came to his door. David stood before his captain and the media, admitting his mistake publicly. "I let pressure and pride cloud my judgment. I nearly destroyed an innocent family, and I take full responsibility for my actions." Some people called him a hero for his honesty. Others criticized him for his original mistake. But David didn't care about public opinion anymore. He only cared about making things right. 6 months later, the small town had begun to heal. Tom was free and had returned to college. Stronger and more determined than ever, the experience had changed him. But not in the way one might expect. Instead of becoming better, he had developed a deeper understanding of justice and human nature. Tom walked across the college campus with his books under his arm, just like he had been doing on that terrible morning 6 months ago. But now everything was different. His classmates looked at him with respect and admiration. They had watched him go through the worst experience of his life with dignity and grace. "I want to study law," Tom told Emma one evening as they walked through the park, where they used to play as children. The same park where they had built sandcastles and chased butterflies when they were young. "I want to help people who are wrongly accused, just like you helped me." Emma smiled proudly at her brother. She watched him as he spoke, seeing the new strength in his eyes. The 3 months in jail had been terrible, but they had also shown Tom what he was truly capable of. "You'll make an excellent lawyer, Tom. You understand both sides of the system now." Tom nodded as he picked up a fallen leaf from the ground. "I know what it feels like to be accused of something you didn't do. I know how scary it is when you feel like no one believes you. But I also learned that there are good people in the system who really want to help." David had faced consequences for his mistake. He was suspended from duty for 6 months and had to undergo additional training. The suspension was difficult for David and his family. They had to manage on Helen's salary alone. David struggled with feelings of shame and regret, but the experience had transformed him too. He spent his suspension time volunteering at community centers and speaking to young police officers about the importance of thorough investigation and humility. David would visit police academies and tell new officers about his mistake and what he had learned from it. Don't let pressure make you rush to judgment, David would tell the young officers. Take the time to gather real evidence. Remember that every person you arrest is someone's child, someone's brother or sister. Make sure you're doing the right thing. When David returned to duty, he was assigned to work with Judge Emma on a new community justice program. Their goal was to prevent future mistakes and build better relationships between the police and the community. The program brought together police officers, judges, lawyers, and ordinary citizens to talk about how to make the justice system better. Officer Thompson. Emma said during their first official meeting, "I want you to know that my family forgives you. We've seen your genuine remorse and your efforts to change." David's eyes filled with tears. He had been worried about this moment for months, wondering if the Baker family would ever be able to forgive him. "Thank you, Your Honor. I promise to spend the rest of my career making sure nothing like this happens again." The Baker family had been through a terrible ordeal, but they emerged stronger. Robert and Mary were proud of both their children, Tom for his resilience and Emma for her integrity. The months of worry and extra work had been hard on them, but they had learned that their family could survive anything when they stuck together. Mary had kept every letter that Tom wrote to them from jail. She would read them sometimes and remember how brave her son had been during those dark months. Robert had framed the newspaper article about Tom's release and hung it in their living room. The community had also learned valuable lessons about the importance of supporting one another and seeking truth over quick answers. People realized that they needed to be more careful about rushing to judgment and more willing to stand up for what was right. Tom and David eventually became unlikely friends at first. Their meetings were awkward and difficult. Tom's parents weren't sure if they wanted their son to spend time with the man who had arrested him, but slowly they began to see that David was truly sorry and was working hard to make things better. Tom would often visit David's community talks, sharing his experience and showing forgiveness in action. Their friendship became a symbol of hope for the entire town. People would see them together and remember that even the worst mistakes could be forgiven when people were willing to change. "I don't hate Officer Thompson," Tom would tell audiences. "He made a mistake, but he was brave enough to admit it and work to fix it. That's what good people do when they make mistakes." Emma continued her work as a judge, now with an even deeper understanding of how the justice system could both fail and heal. She was known for her fairness, her compassion, and her unwavering commitment to truth. Other judges would ask her for advice about difficult cases, and she would always tell them to remember that real people were affected by their decisions. Williams, the elderly man who had been hit by the car, recovered fully. He became a strong supporter of the community justice program, often saying, "Good can come from bad situations if we're willing to learn and grow." Mr. Williams would attend the community meetings, walking with his cane but speaking with a strong voice. He had forgiven Charles Harrison, the man who hit him, and he believed that everyone deserved a second chance if they were willing to change. As the sun set over their small town, David and Emma stood together at the community center, watching Tom teach a group of young people about their rights and responsibilities. The three of them had learned that justice isn't just about punishment. It's about healing, growth, and building a better future for everyone. "Thank you," David said quietly to Emma, "for showing me what true justice looks like." "Thank you," Emma replied. for showing me what true courage looks like. And in that moment, they all understood that sometimes the greatest victories come not from being perfect, but from being willing to admit our mistakes and work together to create something better. The end.